Minister, ladies and gentlemen, a warm welcome also from my side. As Mr. Werner said, he's got two roles that he has today. I also have two roles today. I'm reporting to you together with the mayor as a member of the regional forum. But in addition to that, I am also the head of operations and strategy for German air traffic control, therefore responsible for 60 airports that are operated through ILS, but also the entire region around that needs to be operated. I also would like to pass the director of DFS, his regards to you. He is very well aware of the fact that when it comes to using the airspace, having 3 million flights a year and 1 million departures and approaches that we have to take care of, this is quite a comprehensive scope. Cargo requests an efficient and safe flow of traffic. And then you also have the noise element coming into play. I was asked whether I'd be chairing this expert committee on active noise abatement. In that position, I am responsible for the DFS-related measures, but I'm also responsible for assessing some of the active noise abatement measures. And I said, yes, I will take over that position because I believe that the balanced approach is key to our efforts. And using airspace is a matter of capacity, but it's also a matter of making sure that the environment around an airport is taken into account. When you take the Rhine-Main region as an example, it's a densely populated area. There are other airports where the population living around is not as dense as over here in Frankfurt, so that is why you have safety, you have noise abatement, and you have the needs of all stakeholders that come into play. So that is why active noise abatement is so key in the working of this group, and therefore we concentrate on such measures. Thank you very much also, Mr. Boddenbeck, for inviting me to speak here. I know that you talked about impatience. I'm well aware of that, and even in Montreal, we represent the needs and talk about the measures that we believe are worth implementing on a worldwide scale. So this is an engine that's been running on the worldwide scale in order to make sure that these measures can also be used in Chile, in Beijing, but also in Frankfurt and smaller airports. So that is why the consultation that is behind that requires some time, and that is why you have to put that in perspective, and that is why in the composition of this expert group on active noise abatement, you also can see a great progress in that you have representatives from the municipalities as well as the air traffic stakeholders that now embark on a consultation process that, in addition to the regulatory requirements that are there as part of the Air Traffic Commission, you have an additional expert group coming into play. You have a consultation group, an expert group that makes sure that the municipalities, that the regulatory authorities, that the air traffic controllers are all involved, and these experts come together in order to assess whether a measure is worth implementing or not, because the highly impacted regions might not be alleviated by the implementation of that measure. So we define basic preconditions that are listed here, and we not try to make sure that we do not put an extra burden on those that are already heavily affected by noise. But as the Minister President Bouffier introduced this list of measures, there are also measures that relate to a regional approach that is not only those here in the Frankfurt area, but also in the Main-Kinzig-Kreis, for instance, or regions further to the west of the Rhine-Main area. These are not the most highly affected regions, but they're also impacted by noise. It's the largest continent continental hub in Europe. And that is why you have to implement procedures and measures that are robust enough to stand the traffic. If you have 100 flight movements an hour, you have to have a robust procedure, and you need to make sure that you don't have a single snowflake that can turn the entire system upside down and lead to a breakdown of the system. You need a reliable and safe flow of air traffic, even with this high number of flight movements that we have here in Frankfurt. And that is why we already alluded to that. We had a first package of measures from 2010 that contained so-called drops measures, or also had the CDA optimization as part of it. So some of these measures have been implemented quite successfully. They're part of the regular procedure, but that doesn't mean that we leave them up to themselves. It is still part of the monitoring that we also initiated, and this monitoring is trying to make sure that we can adjust potential measures to what we'd like to see. Air traffic is not anything that you have on tracks going in orderly fashion from A to B, following the tracks that you predefined in railway traffic. If you consider airspace that has more than just one dimension, and if you have headwind, for instance, you cannot fly along the line that might have been defined on some map. You might fly a little further to the left or right, and that is why it is important to have established these criteria that allow you also to deviate from that predefined route, because that third dimension that you have in air traffic is different to what happens on the ground, traffic on the ground, that is. And then also with satellite navigation, you can fly in a more precise manner. GBS system that you already alluded to, that of course makes flying more precise in the approach as well as the starting phase. So the satellite approach also has a certain range within which aircrafts can fly, because they're not on tracks like in the railway world, and it's good to be able to deviate from that. That is just also a support required. And then also we have the Umwelthaus that supports the expert group. So Misselanz is very active in that, in the preparation as well as in the monitoring of the implementation of such measures. Now, if you look at this slide, we already alluded to the complexity involved in measures to be implemented. So these have to be prepared, they have to be implemented. I know that there is a level of impatience involved, that impatience might be an engine. Do we need to use 2 years or 3, maybe need 3 or 4? The 3.2 slope that the expert group suggested, quite successfully so. Car International does not foresee 3.2 at Frankfurt Airport. So they say this is the standard, 3.2, and only deviate from that standard if there are any obstacles that provide a reason for that. And the final approach lines in Frankfurt are built in a way so that there shouldn't be any obstacle in flying higher, 0.2 degrees, that is. Still, we managed to talk to the Ministry of Traffic and the regulatory authorities to make sure that the 3.2 degrees are possible. So there was no additional obstacle, like some tower or something, and therefore we were able to increase that by 0.2 degrees. And with the support of the Federal Ministry of Traffic, this exceptional rule was permitted, but going to 3.2 degrees makes sure that all the stakeholders involved went in the same direction and said, okay, aircrafts can do that. It is possible to do that with the aircraft we have, and then also the air traffic controllers are also capable of implementing that. So that is why the approach procedure is initiated at a later stage, and then also the measurement points that are then to assess the advantages and prove thereby also those potential advantages are part of that as well. Also with a 3.2 degree approach angle, there were a couple of details that I feel glad we took into account. Fraport supported us in a diploma thesis. I believe it was a student or an apprentice or something who cooperated and analyzed the final approach procedure and looked at when they would bring out the landing gear. And then this person analyzed why it was quieter or not. So he would stand there in the morning on a regular basis and analyzed landing procedures. Now, 15 years ago, when I was an apprentice, I would have liked to see that. Today it would be a little more boring probably, but these are small details that also contribute to an overall measure in order to assess whether we've been successful or not. And then we also have the scientific support in those 3.2 degrees. Why was it quieter in one case and more noisy in another one? Now here on the chart, basically, you can see a standard, if you want, of implementation of measures. ICAO also has a quality requirement in the implementation of new measures. They suggest a first screening of measures that they would like to see. Then also the criteria have to be looked into, and then also the definition of possible timeframes for implementation. Those also form basis for an underlying an underlying work framework, basically. Be it the databases, be it the maps you have to have, be it the pilot that might sit in a jumbo in Tokyo in the afternoon. He will look at the map just shortly before landing and will not think about the degrees, be it 3.0 or 3.2. Okay, 3.2 as a standard, but then he'll have to have the maps available, and we have to support the pilots obviously as well, and therefore the preparation is key. Having the maps available, having pilots assess those maps, having also briefed all the stakeholders is key to implementation just as well. Now, the test program is also accompanied by monitoring measures and measurements, obviously, and we have the head of the commission in our group. So if we consult on measures for active noise abatement, we also have the scientific input. We have the material that we provide. And then we can go ahead and say, well, I mean, the municipalities that consult air traffic stakeholders have done air traffic noise studies that say, okay, these measures are worth implementing. And in Frankfurt, we set a standard saying, in my daily work, I can only say, as someone who is responsible for 59 airports, these same questions are asked at other airports in Germany just as well. Also, there they try to take active noise abatement measures and look for support. What are the advantages of such an approach? And that is why the scientific support of the FRR is so key in order to make sure that what you decide upon can be implemented, and saying, yes, well, it could be noisier in one part of the region, but quieter in the overall region is important to know. If you have a noisier part of the region that you open up, basically, you might have newly effective inhabitants all of a sudden, and So you have new stakeholders coming into play. So if you have those newly affected people, you always need to be very thorough in assessing a potential measure, because let's suppose you go for a walk in the forest Saturday afternoon. You feel all good about yourself because it's all quiet, and then an aircraft approaches and you feel disturbed by that, annoyed by that, and that is why it's not only the densely populated areas that might feel annoyed or disturbed by that. We also get feedback from other areas. For instance, people go out to the woods in the on the weekend. Those are the areas that that we might have selected in the expert group. Also represents a disadvantage to those people that might go there just to be surrounded by quietness. So that is why those new procedures also have to look into whether these are newly affected people, or is this a recreational area? So there was a lot of weighing that comes into play. Where do you put the flying route, in a way that is a convenient task, but also a task with a lot of responsibility that we took here in this expert group. Now, the examples you see here, and I will not go into too much detail about them, we also very intentionally attach them to our presentation. This is just for informational purposes, really, for you to be able to see the approach we take in the preparatory measures. So this is just an example. And let me see whether that laser pointer works. So that's the so-called König Kurz, as we call it. So it goes this way, and now I like to move it there. So in the expert group on active noise abatement, we then try to see, well, a lot of these aircrafts do not fly precisely along that route. Some turn earlier or later, and they mainly stay within that corridor, that predefined corridor, but there is still some range, and if you deviate from that route, you all of a sudden have newly affected populations, and that is why if you wanted to implement that, you'd have to see, as part of the consultation process, how feasible that is, and therefore you need to involve those newly affected populations as well. Now, in airline benchmarking, we tried to see whether there are any long-term incentives, measures for long-term incentives for a long-term reduction of noise emission and emission. Mr. Bodenberg already alluded to that. It's a fee-based structure, so it's a financial component. And we basically ask ourselves the question, is there an area where the corridor is defined too widely? So it's airline benchmarking that outside of Europe is already taken as a standard. We're not that far yet in terms of implementing that, but the expert group is working on that just as well. So this was another example, and then of course you can reduce ground noise. Usually, while landing, thrust reversal is used. Is that necessary, or can you refrain from doing that? Is there another possibility? So that is why, again, you need to look into that situation, look at what other airports do, and then see whether you can apply that to Frankfurt as well. And there is another procedure that is called the point merge system. So today we have them guided and merged, therefore, in order to bring them together for landing. That's a new method. So the air traffic controllers work very differently in that procedure. So we have systems that have been implemented in Oslo, for instance, and there is a trial operation going on in Oslo, and then the Senior European Sky ATM research is looking into that just as well on a research level. And now in Paris, the merge areas are far away from Paris at the French-Belgian border, and then they bring them together for landing. In Oslo, the merge area is just above the airport, so you can see how big of a range this merge area could be. So 400 kilometers away from the actual airport or directly at the airport. So this is what you have to see given the airspace around the airport. So this is how you need to assess the system in order to find the optimum approach. So having said that, also thank you very much to all the members of the expert group on active noise abatement. The regulatory authorities, the airline representatives, the air traffic control representatives, and the municipal representatives. I'd like to thank all of you for the successful cooperation. And just to close with what Mr. Bodenberg said, we're also impatient. And we have quite a comprehensive agenda to cover for the next 2 or 3 years, also given the potential changes on in the regulatory environment, and thus we try to make a valid contribution in active noise abatement to the Rhine-Main area. Thank you very much for your cooperation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Biestmann, Mr. Ockel. We have time for some questions if there are any. So please raise your hand, and there might be a microphone over there, I don't know. Please, can somebody run to bring the microphone in the last row? Okay. We need the microphone because of some translation, anyhow, not only because of loudness.
Mein Name ist Hubert Meisinger.
My name is Hubert Meisinger. I am with the Protestant Church in Hesse and Nassau, responsible for flight noise issues. And I have 2 questions on your presentation. Now, you talked about the change from 3.0 to 3.2 and the fact that it needs to have an obstacle in order for the ICAO to allow for that to happen. I believe there won't be any improvements really if you take a technocratic approach to changes. So you were talking about towers, but people that are impacted in their health because of the existing routes, these are obstacles according to this definition as well. But this is no longer a technocratic approach, but an approach that you'd have to see differently. And I think the effect for the people living in those areas is important as well. And the ICAO is not an independent body. It is financed by third parties as well. And I live in the area. We're talking about dialogue. I cannot feel a dialogue. There is a school, and if König Kurz is to be changed, the aircrafts would fly over that school, and they just recently were allowed to build a new building, and this would be a pure catastrophe. Well, this was precisely the reason for the 2.2, and not just to look at the technical level for the 3.2 to say, okay, these are the reasons. Yes, but if you deviate from these recommendations, it's like an industry standard. If you deviate from that, you might run a higher risk, and then you also have to describe the risk minimizing measures, and that is why we took that approach. Yes, there is a basis, and this is the one that we apply. This is not an obstacle, to use your words, those recommendations, that is, in order not to do it. I believe the expert group on active noise abatement was very clear on that. We tried to push this forward. And then the second issue of dialogue, the airport forum and the regional forum, in addition to the expert group, also define a task for itself that you can best describe.
Still in the position of the moderator. Concerning the communication with the region, there is always a two-way procedure. So first of all, we have now established the forum. We have established also the Umwelt- und Nachbarschaftshaus, which is responsible also for the communication in the area. And we are offering. We cannot do much more than offering. We cannot go, and we don't like to go from door to door. We can offer that we come to the different communities to have a discussion over there, that we invite the communities to come to us. They can participate in the so-called convent of the forum. So there are many possibilities, but it's not that a passive behavior is really very successful in that point. So if there is a special necessity or some will of communication, we are more than ready to come there even tomorrow. So hier vorne war noch ein. Please.
Bertolt Wult, Bundesvereinigung gegen.
So, Mr. Biestmann, I have a question on a 3-degree rule. Now, is the ICAO 3-degree stipulation applicable also if you have several approach procedures with different slopes offered? Because the number of possible glide slopes is unlimited for one runway. Is it now permissible also to offer steeper slopes in addition to the 3 degrees? Offering additional glide slopes depends on the operations at the airport. If you want to have 100 flights coming in and departing an hour, and you want to make sure this also works, when you have fog, for instance, and less than a meter that you can look ahead, then you cannot apply the 3.0. ICAO says 3.0 is the limit. You could not land at 3.2, and so we said under good weather conditions like today, it's 3.2, but if it's foggy, we'd go to 3.0. So we'd handle it in a flexible manner, and therefore the regulatory authority says, okay, 100 flight movements an hour is possible, and we want to implement it with the respective quality requirements. No major delays in case of fog or snow, and that is why GBES was also developed in that way. So having the different angles adjustable, but the important thing is to have the pilot know what procedure to apply, but the air traffic controllers will let the pilots know. And yes, of course, we have those different slopes.